Welcome to part 2 of the 100mm focal length for the SLR Lounge Canon Lens Wars series. We have a total of 6 lenses in this grouping, and in the first part we discussed just the 100mm primes. In this part 2, we're going to be covering the 6 zoom/telephoto lenses that cross the 100mm focal length. Then finally in part 3, we're going to take our favorite zoom/telephoto lens and compare it over to our primes to get our final 100mm focal length conclusion. For those that are new to the SLR Lounge Canon Lens Wars series, be sure to check out the teaser video where we basically introduce the entire series. We talk about our testing methodology and what we're looking for in each of these images. Also, check out all the other videos and articles on slrlounge.com for each of the other focal lengths. Now, this is part 2 of the 100mm focal length Lens Wars. We're going to compare our 6 zoom/telephoto lenses, all at 100mm. Now, if you saw the 70 or the 85mm Lens Wars series, then you'll recognize many, or if not most, of these lenses. In our lineup, we have the 24-105 f4. We have the 7200 f4, we have the 70-200 f2.8L, and then we have the 7200 f2.8L Mark II with image stabilization. We also have the 7200, this is the 28-300 f3.5 to 5.6, I believe, and then also the 100mm to 400, 4.5 to 5.6, which is our new entry. Again, we're going to start the same way with each of the lenses at their WOA or wide open aperture by doing some basic visual comparisons by simply viewing the images full screen on a 27-inch 3K resolution display. Now, when we did this for the 70mm and the 85mm focal lengths, we realized that basically our favorite lenses were the 7200 2.8L without IS and then the 7200 2.8L Mark II, and these were the two favorites as far as their overall look, the quality to their bokeh, the overall aesthetic, the image quality, sharpness, color contrast, so forth. So we want to see if the same holds true within the 100mm focal length as well. In viewing each of these images at full screen at their respective WOAs or their wide open apertures, we noticed the exact same phenomenon that we've seen earlier, and that was that basically our super versatile lenses, they ended up having noticeably lower image quality, clarity, sharpness, bokeh as well compared to, say, the 7200s. The same thing held true at 100mm, and basically in viewing the 24-105 and viewing the 28-300 and the 100-400, each of them appeared to be a little bit soft, and it was noticeable before we even zoomed into the images. In addition, they all had less bokeh. They had less bokeh also. The aesthetic quality of the bokeh wasn't as good as the 7200s. And we're talking about both versions of the 7200s, both the f2.8, the f2.8 IS version, and the f4. Now, the leaders in terms of having the most bokeh, the best aesthetic quality of the bokeh, were the 7200 2.8s. The Mark II slightly in front, but really both these were difficult to distinguish from the overall quality of the image. They almost looked identical, simply one without IS and one with. But right behind these two lenses was the 7200 f4, which again, the amount of bokeh, the quality of the bokeh that we got out of it was simply better than the other 3 lenses that were at the bottom of the list. And while you could say that all the lenses did have good contrast and overall color, once again there were certain lenses that were great, and that was the 7200s. Both versions of the f2.8s and the f4 stood out with better contrast, better color that was simply slightly above the others in this comparison. In the lead, once again, I would say the 7200 f2.8L Mark II and the non-IS version of the same lens. Now, once we stepped up to a WCA, or a widest common aperture of f5.6, the visual differences between each lenses appeared to equalize, at least for the most part. Now, what still differentiated the two 7200 f2.8s from the other lenses just a slight bit was really the overall better contrast, better color, and it still had just a bit more bokeh in the background, although at this point it was getting to kind of splitting hairs. We had to really compare side by side. In addition, upon zooming into our model, we can once again see that the 7200s, both versions of the f2.8s, are again sharper than the other lenses. Once again, for center area sharpness, I would put the 7200 f2.8L Mark II in first, and then the 7200 f2.8L in second place, and then with comparable sharpness is actually the 7200 f4 as well. However, the 100-400, the 28-300, and the 24-105, these were all noticeably less sharp when zoomed in towards the center of the image. Again, of these bottom 3, I would say in last place is our poor 24-105, while basically the 100-400 and the 28-300 were both pretty similar. Again, at their WCA of f5.6, I'd probably say that the 7200 f2.8L non-IS was a little bit ahead in terms of, say, edge sharpness than when compared to the 7200L Mark II, but just very slightly, and it was difficult to see without basically zooming in. The 7200 f4 was also quite decent as well in terms of edge sharpness, and while most of the lenses were pretty solid in edge sharpness, two lenses performed noticeably poorer than the others, and that was basically our 24-105 f4 and unfortunately the 100-400. So once again, it's time for our conclusion. And again, the two lenses that I would most recommend within this focal length are the 7200 f2.8L IS Mark II and the non-IS 7200 f2.8L. Both of these lenses, they simply outperform all of the other telephoto and zoom lenses within this same focal length in terms of overall amount of bokeh, the overall aesthetic quality of the bokeh. The sharpness, contrast, clarity, and color, everything stood out in these two lenses, and it's been that way across all the focal ranges that we've tested them within. In fact, the visual differences are actually quite noticeable when simply viewing the images at full screen. So based on your budget, if it's available to you, then simply jump to the image stabilized version of the 7200, which is going to cost around $2,500. If you're on more of a budget, then the non-stabilized version of the f2.8L is around $1,500. These two lenses are simply going to give you the best overall image quality within their respective focal ranges. Now, while the 7200 f4L also provides great image quality at around $1,300 or so, it's right around the same price as the 7200 f2.8L. And that means that unless you absolutely need the image stabilization that comes with this lens, I would rather you go with the non-stabilized version, the f2.8L, which is going to give you a better overall look. It'll give you more bokeh, a better aesthetic to the bokeh, and also better low light performance than the f4. Lenses like the 28-300 and the 100-400, they are extremely versatile, and they have their functions and their uses simply due to that focal range flexibility. But just remember that you're always going to be compromising the overall image quality for that flexibility in their focal range. Their low light performance really can't touch that of the 7200 f2.8s, as they're going to be around, say, f5, which is nearly 1.5 to 2 stops less light when they're at the telephoto focal length. Also, in terms of bokeh, they're going to have less bokeh, they're going to have poor aesthetics to the bokeh and so forth. But I would still say that if I was going on a trip and I had to pick one single lens to accompany me, I'd probably go with the 28-300 over the 100-400. And the reason why is that the extra 100 millimeters in focal length on the 100-400, basically from 300 to 400 millimeters, it's nice. But I think most people are going to find more use in that wide to kind of zoom range, the 28 to 100 millimeter focal range, than in the 300 to 400 millimeter focal range. So I would still say the 20 to 300 is the best bet as far as if you're looking for one single lens in overall focal range versatility. Again, the one lens that I really can't find much merit in recommending, and I hate doing this to this poor guy, but it's the 24-105 f4. In my mind, really the only redeeming factor to this lens is that it has image stabilization, and it is a little bit cheaper than the rest. But we've basically shown that at every single focal length, this lens has been consistently outperformed across the board. And at $1,150, it's not necessarily that inexpensive either. Instead of this lens, I'd recommend something like the 24-70 f4 or the 7200 f4. Both of these lenses are comparable in price. They're slightly more expensive, but very close, and both have image stabilization. They're going to offer better overall image quality, more bokeh, better aesthetics to the bokeh overall, better contrast color, and really just a better image in every single area. So I know it's sad, but skip out on this little guy. I hope you all enjoyed part 2 of the 100mm focal length in the SLR Lounge Canon Lens Wars series. Be sure to check out the article by clicking in the description below the video, where you can see more example images, more information on each of the lenses that we talked about in this video, as well as links on where to purchase. My name is Pye, and I'll see you all in the next video.